The Soviet Union, 1978, a superpower shrouded in secrecy. Beneath the facade of order, a nightmare was brewing. A monster was about to rise, leaving an indelible stain on the soul of a nation. His name would become synonymous with terror, Andrei Chikatilo. His hunting ground, the sprawling expanse of the Soviet Union, his victims, men, women, children, each murder a gruesome spectacle, each one pushing the boundaries of depravity. Fear stalked the land. Parents clutched their children closer. Whispers of a shadowy figure preying on the innocent spread like wildfire. The authorities, however, remained tight-lipped. The true extent of the horrors kept hidden from the public. The killings continued, each one a testament to the killer's growing confidence, his descent into madness. The stage was set for a terrifying game of cat and mouse, one that would drag on for over a decade. The Soviet Union of the late 70s and 80s was a nation in flux. It was a time of significant change and underlying tension, a period marked by both rigid control and subtle shifts in the social and political landscape. The iron grip of the Cold War held firm, yet beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. The Soviet Union projected an image of strength and unity, but internally the pressures were mounting. Economic stagnation, political repression, and a growing sense of disillusionment pervaded society. The promises of the communist regime seemed increasingly hollow to the average citizen. For ordinary citizens, life was a constant struggle. The daily grind was marked by long hours at work, often in harsh conditions, and the ever-present challenge of securing basic necessities. Food shortages were commonplace, and basic necessities were often scarce. People spent hours in lines, hoping to get their hands on whatever goods were available, a stark contrast to the abundance promised by the state. The weight of the communist regime pressed down on every aspect of life, from education to employment. Schools indoctrinated children with state propaganda, while workplaces were tightly controlled environments where dissent was not tolerated. This oppressive atmosphere, coupled with a deep-seated culture of secrecy, created the perfect breeding ground for fear. The omnipresent surveillance and the threat of state retribution kept people in a constant state of anxiety. News traveled slowly, often heavily censored by the state. The government controlled the flow of information, ensuring that only the official narrative reached the public. Rumors flourished in the darkness, amplifying the sense of unease. In the absence of reliable information, people turned to whispers and speculation, which only heightened their fears. It was against this backdrop of uncertainty and paranoia that Andrei Chikatilo began his reign of terror. The serial killer exploited the chaos and fear, preying on the most vulnerable members of society. The authorities, more concerned with maintaining the facade of order, were slow to react, their response hampered by bureaucracy and a reluctance to admit the presence of such a monster within their midst. The inefficiency and denial within the system allowed Chikatilo to continue his horrific crimes for years, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. The impact of his actions was profound, shaking the already fragile trust in the government and its ability to protect its people. The legacy of this dark period is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the human cost of political repression. Andrei Chikatilo was born into a world of poverty and hardship. His early years were spent in a small, impoverished village in Ukraine, where the spectre of famine and war loomed large. The harsh realities of Soviet life during this period were unforgiving, and young Andrei's family struggled to make ends meet. His childhood, set against the backdrop of a war-torn Ukraine, was marked by deprivation and trauma. The Second World War had left deep scars on the land and its people. Villages were decimated, families torn apart, and the constant threat of violence was a daily reality. For Andrei, these early experiences were formative, shaping his worldview in ways that would later manifest in dark and disturbing behaviors. He grew up witnessing unspeakable atrocities, the scars of which would forever remain etched in his psyche. The brutalities of war, the sight of death and destruction, and the pervasive sense of fear and helplessness left an indelible mark on his young mind. These experiences would later resurface in his twisted fantasies and violent actions. Shy and awkward, Chikatilo was plagued by feelings of inadequacy and sexual impotence. His inability to connect with others, especially women, led to deep-seated feelings of frustration and resentment. In school, he was often the target of bullying, further exacerbating his sense of isolation and inadequacy. He found solace in twisted fantasies, his desires becoming increasingly violent and perverse. As he retreated further into his own mind, these fantasies began to take on a life of their own, providing a dark escape from the harsh realities of his existence. The line between fantasy and reality began to blur, setting the stage for the horrors that were to come. His inability to form meaningful relationships, coupled with his deep-seated insecurities, further fueled his descent into darkness. The more he struggled to connect with others, the more he retreated into his violent fantasies. His sense of powerlessness in his personal life drove him to seek control and dominance in the most horrific ways. As he grew older, Chikatilo managed to secure a position as a teacher, a role that gave him access to vulnerable young people. This position of authority provided him with a veneer of respectability, masking the darkness that lurked beneath. His interactions with students were often marked by inappropriate behavior, hinting at the sinister urges that he struggled to keep hidden. His outward demeanor, however, masked a sinister secret. To the outside world, he appeared to be a quiet, unassuming man, dedicated to his work and family. But beneath this facade, the monster within was growing stronger, driven by an insatiable lust for power and control. The monster within was stirring, driven by an insatiable lust for power and control. His fantasies grew darker and more violent, and the urge to act on them became increasingly difficult to resist. The veneer of normalcy he had carefully constructed was beginning to crack, revealing the true extent of his depravity. His first known murder, in 1978, was a watershed moment. It marked the beginning of a reign of terror that would last for over a decade. The floodgates of his depravity had been opened, unleashing a torrent of violence that would shock the world. Each subsequent crime became more brutal and calculated as he sought to satisfy his insatiable desires. The floodgates of his depravity had been opened, unleashing a torrent of violence that would shock the world. The authorities were initially baffled by the sheer brutality and apparent randomness of the crimes. It would take years of painstaking investigation and the tireless efforts of law enforcement to finally bring Andrei Chikatilo to justice, ending one of the most horrifying chapters in criminal history. Section 4. Blood on the Steppes, the Rostov Ripper's reign of terror. Chikatilo's killing spree began subtly, almost tentatively. His early victims were often young runaways or those on the fringes of society, their disappearances easily dismissed or overlooked. But as his confidence grew, so too did the audacity of his crimes. He lured his victims with promises of help or companionship, using his unassuming appearance to disarm them. Once alone, the mask would slip, revealing the monster beneath. His attacks were brutal, frenzied acts of savagery, often involving torture, mutilation and cannibalism. The bodies began to surface, dumped in wooded areas or shallow graves near train stations. Each discovery sent shockwaves through the region, fueling a climate of terror. The press, initially hesitant to report on the crimes, began to publish sensationalized accounts, dubbing the unknown killer the Rostov Ripper. Section 5. The Hunter and the Hunted, a race against evil. The mounting body count and escalating brutality of the murders placed immense pressure on the Soviet authorities. The streets of the Soviet Union in the 1980s were gripped with fear as the killer's reign of terror seemed unstoppable. Each new crime scene painted a grim picture of the horrors that were unfolding. A special task force was formed, tasked with hunting down the elusive killer. This team was composed of the best and brightest minds in Soviet law enforcement, each member bringing their unique skills to the table. They knew that failure was not an option, as the safety of countless citizens depended on their success. Led by Viktor Burakov, a seasoned detective known for his tenacity, the investigators faced an uphill battle. Burakov's reputation for solving complex cases made him the ideal leader for this daunting mission. His determination and relentless pursuit of justice inspired his team to push beyond their limits. Forensic science in the Soviet Union lagged behind the West, and the vastness of the country made tracking the killer's movements incredibly difficult. The investigators had to rely on their wits and limited resources, often working with outdated technology and methods. The sheer size of the Soviet Union added another layer of complexity, as the killer could strike anywhere and disappear without a trace. Undeterred, Burakov and his team embarked on a painstaking investigation. They worked around the clock, driven by a sense of duty and the desire to bring the killer to justice. The long hours and relentless pressure took a toll on the team, but they remained steadfast in their mission. They interviewed countless witnesses, scoured crime scenes for clues, and painstakingly pieced together the killer's modus operandi. The pressure was on. Each piece of evidence, no matter how small, was meticulously analyzed in the hopes of finding a breakthrough. The team knew that the key to solving the case lay in the details. Each new victim brought with it a fresh wave of public outrage and demands for justice. The media coverage of the murders kept the public on edge, and the authorities were under constant scrutiny. The fear and anger of the citizens fueled the investigators' determination to catch the killer. The investigators knew they were dealing with a cunning and ruthless adversary, one who seemed to vanish into thin air after each kill. The killer's ability to evade capture time and time again was both frustrating and terrifying. The team had to stay one step ahead, anticipating the killer's next move and closing in before he could strike again.